For years, Sam Heughan had answered the same question with the same calm, carefully controlled response. Whenever interviewers brought up Caitríona Balfe, he would smile, pause just long enough to acknowledge the curiosity, and then gently steer the conversation toward professionalism, friendship, and trust. It became a pattern that fans knew by heart, predictable, safe, and impossible to break. That is exactly why this moment felt so different. It happened during what seemed like another routine interview, one of many where Sam was asked to reflect on his journey with Outlander. He spoke about the years they had spent filming together, the emotional demands of the story, and the connection that had grown between the cast. Nothing about his tone suggested anything unusual was coming. Then the question appeared again. This time, it was phrased almost casually, asking about his relationship with Caitríona and how it had evolved over the years. Normally, this would have triggered the same familiar answer. But instead of responding immediately, Sam hesitated. It was a small pause, barely noticeable to a casual viewer. But for fans who had watched him for years, it stood out instantly. There was something different in the way he looked down for a moment, as if choosing his words more carefully than usual. When he finally spoke, his voice remained calm, but the content of what he said carried a weight that no one expected. At first, he described their connection in a way that sounded familiar. He talked about trust, about the bond that forms when two actors spend years working together on emotionally intense scenes. He acknowledged that what they built on screen required a deep understanding of each other, something that couldn't be faked or rushed. For a moment, it seemed like he was following the same path he always had. But then, he went further. Sam admitted that what he and Caitríona share has always been more complex than what people typically understand as a professional relationship. He didn't label it, didn't define it clearly, but he made it clear that it carried a depth that went beyond simple co-stars working together. And then came the line that changed everything. He suggested that some of the emotions audiences see on screen are not entirely constructed, that in order to make those moments believable, they sometimes have to come from somewhere real. It wasn't said dramatically, and there was no attempt to turn it into a headline. If anything, it felt almost like something that slipped out naturally. But for fans, it landed like a shock. Because for years, the idea that their connection might contain something real had been treated as speculation, something discussed in forums and fan theories, but never confirmed. Now, with just a few carefully chosen words, that possibility suddenly felt closer to reality than ever before. What made the moment even more striking was how composed Sam remained. He didn't appear nervous, didn't try to correct himself, and didn't immediately pull back from what he had said. Instead, he continued speaking in the same steady tone, as if he had simply shared something honest rather than controversial. That calmness made the statement feel even more genuine. For viewers watching the clip, it was impossible not to notice the shift. The interviewer seemed slightly taken aback, pausing just briefly before continuing. The conversation moved on, but the atmosphere had changed. Something had been said that couldn't be taken back, even if it wasn't fully explained. Within hours, that moment began spreading across the internet. Fans replayed the clip repeatedly, analyzing every word, every pause, every expression. Some focused on the exact phrasing, trying to determine whether Sam had truly meant what it sounded like. Others paid attention to his body language, searching for signs that might reveal more than his words. And the more people watched it, the more it felt like this was not just another interview answer. It felt like a shift. Because for the first time, Sam Heughan had stepped slightly outside the carefully constructed boundary he had maintained for years. He hadn't confirmed anything directly, hadn't made a clear statement that could be easily defined. But he had allowed something more personal to enter the conversation. And once that happened, it became impossible for fans to ignore. Suddenly, moments from the past began to take on new meaning. Scenes that once felt like exceptional acting now seemed to carry an added layer of possibility. Interactions between Sam and Caitríona, both on and off screen, were revisited with a different perspective. Not as proof, but as something worth questioning. Because in that single moment, Sam didn't just answer a question. He opened a door that had been closed for years, and no one knew exactly how far it might lead. As the clip spread across social media, the reaction was immediate, and far more intense than anyone expected. Fans didn't just watch it once and move on. They replayed it, slowed it down, and analyzed every second as if there was something hidden beneath the surface waiting to be discovered. Very quickly, the community split into two distinct sides. One group believed that Sam had finally said what many had suspected for years. To them, this wasn't just a reflection on acting techniques or emotional depth in performance. It sounded like a subtle admission, not a direct confession, but something close enough to make the idea feel real. They pointed to the way he spoke, the calm confidence, and the absence of hesitation after his initial pause as signs that he meant exactly what he said. But the other side saw it very differently. They argued that Sam's words were being taken out of context, emphasizing that actors often talk about using real emotions to strengthen their performances. In their view, nothing he said was unusual or groundbreaking. It only seemed significant because fans had spent years looking for meaning in every interaction between him and Caitríona. That tension only made the conversation grow louder. Fans began revisiting old interviews, comparing how Sam had answered similar questions in the past. In those earlier moments, his responses had been clear, controlled, and carefully framed. This time, however, there was a noticeable difference, not necessarily in what he said, but in how open it felt. That subtle shift became the center of the debate. At the same time, behind-the-scenes footage started circulating again. Clips of Sam and Caitríona laughing between takes, sharing quiet conversations, or reacting to each other in ways that felt natural and unguarded were suddenly being viewed through a completely different lens. Moments that once seemed like simple friendship now carried a sense of possibility. Of course, there was one undeniable reality that complicated everything. Caitríona Balfe has always been open about her personal life, including her marriage, and has consistently maintained clear boundaries between her work and her private world. For many fans, this fact made it difficult to accept any theory that suggested something more had existed beyond the professional relationship. And yet, the conversation didn't stop. Because what made this moment so powerful wasn't just the words themselves. It was the years of context behind them, the chemistry, the connection, the shared history that fans had watched unfold over time. Sam's statement didn't create the theory. It gave new life to something that had already been there. What added even more intrigue was the silence that followed. Neither Sam nor Caitríona addressed the clip directly. There were no clarifications, no attempts to reframe what had been said, and no effort to shut down the speculation. In a world where even small misunderstandings are often corrected quickly, that silence felt significant. Some fans saw it as proof that there was nothing to explain. Others believed it meant the opposite. In the end, no clear answer emerged. There was no confirmation, no denial, just a moment that lingered, leaving behind more questions than certainty. And perhaps that is why it resonated so strongly. Because sometimes, it's not the clarity that keeps people watching. It's the possibility that something real might exist just beneath the surface, waiting to be understood. Neither Sam nor Caitríona addressed the clip directly. There were no clarifications, no attempts to reframe what had been said, and no effort to shut down the speculation. In a world where even small misunderstandings are often corrected quickly, that silence felt significant. Some fans saw it as proof that there was nothing to explain. Others believed it meant the opposite. In the end, no clear answer emerged. At the same time, behind-the-scenes footage started circulating again. Clips of Sam and Caitríona laughing between takes, sharing quiet conversations, or reacting to each other in ways that felt natural and unguarded was suddenly being viewed through a completely different lens. Moments that once seemed like simple friendship now carried a sense of possibility. Of course, there was one undeniable reality that complicated everything.